9:30 a.m., February 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The African sun beat down upon a landscape that promised easy victory but delivered brutal lessons. The dust was thick, the heat unforgiving, and the air was suddenly split by the high-pitched shriek of an incoming shell. Corporal Frank Buzz Aldridge, commander of an M4 Sherman tank, gripped his control column, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the moment the myth met the reality. Across the arid plain, a shadow emerged, a block of steel moving with terrifying, deliberate speed. It was a machine the Allied forces had only heard whispered tales about, the Panzerkampfwagen 6X Tiger V. It was a beast of 57 tons, clad in armor so thick, 100 millimeters across the glacis plate, that it defied existing Allied ballistics. Aldridge's tank, the simple, reliable M4 Sherman, weighed less than 34 tons. It was a masterpiece of mass production, designed for speed and logistical ease. But it was never designed to fight this. Aldridge ordered the gunner to fire. The 75mm M3 main gun, the very same caliber used on the French fields of 1940, thundered, spitting out an M61 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap, APCR shell. The round hit the massive Tiger squarely on the front plate, producing a shower of sparks that seemed, in that tense moment, almost celebratory. Then the shell simply fragmented, a tiny, harmless pinprick on a giant. The Tiger's own 88mm KWK-36 cannon responded. The resulting impact on the Sherman's hull was not a hit, it was an execution. This scene repeated across North Africa, and later, more brutally, in the hedgerows of Normandy, revealed the terrifying thesis of the early Western Front. Allied quantity was meeting German quality, and quality was winning the day. The M4 Sherman, hailed in the American press as the tank that would roll Hitler back to Berlin, was suddenly being derided by its own crews as a Ronson, because, like the cigarette lighter, it always lit, referring to its propensity to catch fire when hit. In stark contrast, a German tanker, Oberfeldwebel Klaus Richter, of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, recorded his disdain. "When we first saw the Americans' tank, the Sherman, there was laughter. It was a well-proportioned machine, but so easily penetrated. Our 88s and even our 75mm L70 from the Panther made short work of them. They were targets, not adversaries. The Sherman's standard 75mm gun, firing a projectile at approximately 620 meters per second, was simply incapable of defeating the Tiger's frontal armor at any reasonable combat range. The German design philosophy had prioritized armor and firepower. The American philosophy had prioritized logistics and production. In a one-on-one duel, the result was a foregone conclusion. The battlefield had been tilted entirely in favor of the Wehrmacht's steel behemoths. The irony, the profound historical contradiction that would soon unfold, lay not in the tank itself, but in the unseen technological race happening 5,000 miles away. While American crews died in their metal coffins, a small, highly secretive team of ordnance engineers was working on a ballistic solution so radical, so deceptively simple, that it would change the fate of the M4. They weren't designing a new tank or a new gun. They were engineering a new bullet. What the German High Command failed to grasp was the astonishing speed and scale of American wartime R&D. They believed they held the technological edge, a superiority that would last months, perhaps years. They were wrong. Their overconfidence was a strategic blind spot, a hubris that the American industrial machine was about to punish. The terrifying power of the Tiger was forcing an impossible choice: either stop the advance to build a new heavy tank, or find a way to make the tools they already had work. It was a battle not of steel plates, but of metallurgy and momentum. The future of the M4 Sherman, and the lives of the crews like Corporal Aldridge, hinged entirely on a few ounces of a rare, dense metal called tungsten. The sound of the Tiger's 80mm gun was a death knell. What they didn't know was that the little 75mm Sherman was about to acquire a deadly new voice. If you're captivated by the untold stories of wartime innovation that turned the tide of history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss how this humble American tank was secretly handed the key to defeating the mighty Tiger. The battlefield was a cruel testing ground, but the true theater of war for the Americans was the factory floor. While the German war machine prided itself on artisanal, complex engineering, resulting in only 1,347 Tiger I tanks ever being produced, the American war effort was a roaring engine of standardization and sheer, overwhelming volume. The M4 Sherman was the physical manifestation of this industrial creed. By the end of the war, over 49,000 variants of the Sherman would roll off the production lines. For every single Tiger, the Allies could deploy more than 30 Shermans. This was the war of attrition, but sheer numbers alone could not defeat 100 mm of hardened steel. The limitations of the Sherman's M3 75mm gun were intrinsically linked to its lineage. It was a reliable medium-velocity weapon, primarily designed to fire high-explosive HE shells to support infantry and secondarily to deal with lighter tanks. Its standard armor-piercing round, the M61 APCR, relied on mass and a soft steel cap to defeat armor. The velocity was too low, the core too yielding, to overcome the rigid resistance of the massive German heavy tanks. In the sterile, climate-controlled labs of the Aberdeen Proving Ground, the solution was not horsepower or turret size, but physics. The engineers knew that penetration was a function of three variables: mass, diameter, and velocity. If they couldn't drastically increase the gun's caliber, which would necessitate a completely new turret and chassis, they had to dramatically increase velocity. Enter the APCR, armor-piercing composite rigid projectile, or as the Americans designated it, the high-velocity armor-piercing HVAP M93. We needed a sledgehammer, but all we had was a regular hammer, so we decided to put the entire force of the blow into a pinprick, said Dr. Robert Green, a metallurgist involved in the project. The concept was elegant: discard the lead and steel core of the M61. Instead, the M93 utilized a small, sub-caliber core made of tungsten carbide. Tungsten, a metal nearly twice as dense as steel, was housed in a lightweight aluminium shell, the sabot, that matched the 75mm caliber of the gun. Once fired, the gases of the propellant drove the entire assembly out of the barrel. When the round cleared the muzzle, aerodynamic forces stripped away the lighter aluminium casing, leaving only the super-dense, streamlined tungsten spike, a dart, to travel to the target. The transformation in performance was staggering. The standard M61 shell left the muzzle at 620 ms, penetrating roughly 80 mm of vertical armor at 500 meters. The new M93 HVAP round, utilizing the same M3 75mm gun, screamed out at an astonishing 1,036 meters per second. This near superspeed increased the penetrating power dramatically, boosting the effective penetration to nearly 135 mm of armor at the same range. Suddenly, the seemingly obsolete 75mm Sherman could, under optimal conditions, penetrate the frontal 100mm plate of a Tiger I. What the German High Command had confidently dismissed as an inferior mass-produced round, the small 75mm shell, was now capable of carrying the energy of a lightning bolt, thanks to a few ounces of tungsten. It was a technological sleight of hand. The gun was the same, the tank was the same, but the projectile had been weaponized by physics. The scale of this technological shift was not immediately apparent to the Wehrmacht. Their intelligence focused on the appearance of new, larger-caliber Allied tanks, like the British Firefly with its 17-pounder gun. They looked for visible changes. What they didn't anticipate was the insidious, silent change in the core of a widely produced ordinary projectile. The psychological shield of the Tiger's legendary armor was about to be challenged, not by a single supertank, but by a sudden, terrifying capacity hidden within the countless American workhorses. The technological gap was closing, propelled by tungsten and pure velocity, setting the stage for the battlefield's most dramatic and unexpected reversal. The introduction of the M93 HVAP was not a triumphant declaration, it was a logistical whisper. Tungsten was a strategic, rare material, and the production of the complex sub-caliber rounds was laborious. Consequently, the new ammunition was severely rationed, shipped in crates marked simply as special purpose ammunition. Tank platoons were permitted to carry only 2 to 3 rounds of HVAP per Sherman. It was not a primary weapon. It was an emergency last resort, a golden ticket for a duel they were supposed to lose. This scarcity created initial skepticism and confusion among the American crews. Sergeant Jim Callahan, fighting in the Lorraine region in late 1944, recalled the first time his supply officer handed him the crates. They looked like regular shells, but lighter. The OD told us they were the only thing that'll put a dent in a Tiger, but only use them when the German heavy is within point-blank range and you're sure to hit. 2 rounds. That's all you got. Fail, and you're done. The pressure was immense. The stage for the true, terrifying twist was set in the early autumn of 1944. A German reconnaissance patrol, led by an experienced Panther crew, was sweeping through a village outside Metz. The Panther, armed with the formidable 75mm KWK 42L70 gun, was a technological equal to any Allied tank. They spotted a lone Sherman M4A1, seemingly stalled. It was a routine engagement, an easy kill. The Panther commander, Hauptmann Dietrich Voss, gave the fire order. The Panther's massive gun roared and the Sherman was struck, its track blown clean off. The crew was now trapped. Voss waited for the crew to bail out, the customary outcome. But the Sherman was silent. Voss, arrogant in his armor, drove closer for the coup de grace. The trapped Sherman suddenly fired. The sound was different, a sharper crack, a higher pitch than the typical 75mm. A plume of white-hot material struck the Panther's sloped frontal glacis. Voss's world dissolved into a cacophony of smoke and screaming metal. The M93 HVAP, its tungsten core traveling at over 1,000 TSS, had pierced the 80mm thick plate as if it were cardboard, turning the interior of the Panther into a high-pressure fragmentation chamber. The effect was devastating. The Panther was dead, a smoking monument to a projectile that, by all known German calculations, should not have existed. The terror on the German side was immediate and profound. Voss, one of the few survivors, reported back to his unit in a state of shock. It was a 75mm, that much I can tell. We saw the track marks, but the damage, the projectile was a solid spike. It punched right through. We were struck by a regular Sherman, and we are now left to wonder, has the enemy deployed a new high-velocity weapon we failed to identify? Or have they found a way to weaponize their standard cannon beyond its capability? The confusion was the true weapon. German intelligence was baffled. They continued to hunt for a new American heavy tank or a new supergun, failing entirely to comprehend that the threat was not a large, visible change, but a microscopic one. The irony was acute. The German strategy had depended on technological superiority to counteract Allied numerical strength. Now the Americans had countered their technology with a simple change of ammunition, a bullet so fast and dense that it rendered the revered armor of the Tiger I and Panther suddenly vulnerable. This ambiguity, the fact that a standard-looking Sherman could now be carrying a Tiger killer, began to breed a dangerous psychological terror among the Wehrmacht's tanker divisions. The cheerful confidence with which they had bounced 75mm rounds was replaced by a gnawing doubt. Every flicker of an enemy muzzle, every sound of a firing Sherman, no matter how small, now carried the terrifying possibility of the high-velocity tungsten dart. The hunter had suddenly, silently, become the hunted, armed with a technological ghost. December 1944, the Ardennes forest, the Battle of the Bulge. The German offensive was a desperate last-gasp effort to split the Allied line. The snow-swept forests were a cauldron of chaos, fog, and the roar of heavy engines. It was here, in the freezing hell of the Ardennes, that the M93 HVAP rounds would prove their decisive worth, not just as a killer, but as a psychological deterrent. The 4th U.S. Armored Division was pushing through the heavily forested area near Bastogne, their advance spearheaded by a company of M4A3 Shermans. Their enemy, elements of the Führer Begleit Brigade featuring the feared Tiger II, or Königstiger, King Tiger, a tank even more formidable than its predecessor, with up to 185mm of frontal armor. However, the deep snow and close terrain often forced the behemoths into exposed, less than optimal positions. Major Ben Carter, commanding a platoon of 3 Shermans, received the chilling report. 3 King Tigers were dug in, blocking the main road. The odds were, mathematically and historically, 0. Even the HVAP round, with its 135 meters penetration, stood no chance against the frontal plate of a King Tiger. But the terrain offered a tactical opportunity. The Tigers were flanking a thicket, and a small, audacious flanking maneuver might expose their side armor, a weakness of only 80mm. Carter's plan was suicidal. 2 Shermans would fire their standard M61 rounds into the King Tiger's front, forcing the massive turrets to turn, while his Sherman, Hell's Bells, moved at maximum speed into a firing position on the flank. It was a race against the traverse speed of the 70-ton monster. The moment the first 2 Shermans opened fire, the King Tiger's turret swung towards them, its massive 88mm L71 gun seeking its targets. This was the window. Hell's Bells skidded to a stop, the gunner, Private First Class Morales, sighting the relatively flat, vertical side plate of the nearest King Tiger. He had one chance, one precious M93 round. Morales didn't hesitate. The 75mm gun cracked, not thundered. The tungsten dart traversed the 50-meter gap in the blink of an eye. The projectile struck the Tiger II's side armor just behind the driver's hatch, and the effect was immediate. The immense energy of the high-velocity core blew a hole clean through the fuel tanks and engine compartment. A brilliant white flash, followed by a torrent of burning fuel, erupted from the colossal tank. It was immobilized, and critically, it was burning. The second Tiger II, its commander still reeling from the shock, began to swing its turret back, realizing the flank was compromised. Carter's radio crackled. "One down! Reload!" Morales, shaking, loaded his last HVAP round. A second shot struck the rear of the turret, jamming the traverse mechanism. The mighty King Tiger was now a trapped, paralyzed beast. The climax of this battle was not just the destruction of the Tigers, it was the psychological terror it inflicted. A captured German tanker from the second Tiger, later interrogated, spoke of the confusion. "We had total confidence. The Sherman's 75mm could not harm us. We felt nothing." Then the sound changed, the impact was sharper, and suddenly the tank was full of fire. It was not a normal hit. It was a sudden, clean, unstoppable hole. Our armor, our safety, was a lie. The battlefield had reached its point of complete reversal. The Germans, once masters of the heavy tank, now had to reckon with the horrifying possibility that every single ubiquitous Sherman they encountered was carrying the secret to their demise. It wasn't about superior tank design, it was about superior ammunition, deployed sparingly, but with devastating, morale-breaking effect. The M93 HVAP round did not by itself win the war. The vast majority of Shermans in Europe were ultimately fitted with the larger 76mm gun or the fearsome 17-pounder in response to the growing threat. But the tungsten dart played a critical unsung role during a vital period, and its legacy is not measured in quantity of rounds fired, but in the psychological and strategic transformation it wrought upon the battlefield. The true significance of the HVAP round was its perfect embodiment of the Allied war strategy. Overwhelming logistics paired with rapid, targeted technological innovation. The American ability to leverage their industrial base to manufacture hundreds of thousands of standard shells, while simultaneously developing and deploying a highly specialized, limited production countermeasure, proved strategically superior to the German focus on individual, over-engineered masterpieces. The 75mm Sherman, originally considered a jack-of-all-trades, but a master of none, underwent a subtle but profound arc of transformation. It was the platform that could be everywhere, reliable, easy to repair, and manufactured faster than the German forces could destroy them. The HVAP round turned its primary weapon from a general support tool into a terrifying, hidden specialist. It gave the Allied crews a lifeline, a chance to fight back, instilling the necessary confidence to face the behemoths. We return to the overarching historical irony. The Germans placed their faith in the impregnability of their massive, complex armor. They believed their technological supremacy, the 80mm and the thick armor plate, was an enduring strategic asset. The Allies, on the other hand, put their faith in continuous improvement and the relentless output of their factories. The tungsten carbide dart, a small, highly compressed piece of metal, was the physical manifestation of the Allied mindset. Never stop innovating, and use mass production not just for quantity, but as a vehicle for rapid, unexpected change. The final lesson is clear. The Tiger and the Panther were symbols of German engineering might, but they were also a logistical nightmare, requiring thousands of man-hours to produce and constant, complex maintenance. The Sherman, with its new secret weapon, proved that the war was not won by the heaviest tank in a static duel, but by the relentless deployment of an adequate machine, rapidly adapted to meet the threat. The psychological impact lasted until the very end. The German High Command was forced to expend precious time and resources chasing the ghost of the new American supergun, a gun that was always the same, but was firing a fundamentally different and deadly bullet. This ambiguity, this state of perpetual technological surprise, broke the morale of the enemy tank crews and eroded the confidence in their own superior designs. The legacy of the M93 HVAP round is the story of a technological plot twist, a small, overlooked projectile that restored the fighting chance of the workhorse Sherman, proving that in the end, the simple superiority of American innovation and industrial scale was the true Tiger destroyer. That is the untold story of the 75mm Sherman's secret weapon. If you want to delve deeper into the hidden engineering and strategic twists that shaped the Second World War, be sure to like this video, share it with fellow history buffs, and subscribe to the channel for more immersive historical narratives.